Welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show, your one-stop shop for weird news, movie reviews, otherworldly, and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow Creepin' It Real Show on Twitter at creepin_it. You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com. And you can also go to our website, creepinitshow.com. Welcome to Creepin' It Real. I'm one of your hosts, Yardley, and today we're going to do our It Chapter 2 spoiler review. But before we begin, I'm going to bring in my co-host, Kristi. How are you doing?
Hey, good evening. I'm doing good. Well, I guess whatever day it is that you guys are listening, but right now we're doing an evening recording, so it's a little unusual for us. I'm doing well. Haven't seen you in a whole 2 days.
Yeah, I know, right? But we had a good, we had a good time. So, everything's good. I think we should just dive into this. We're really not going to do any weird news today, but I think we should breeze through this fairly fast, even though the movie in itself didn't go by so fast. So, you ready to do it?
Yeah, Moni can't be with us tonight, so we will miss her. So it's just me and Yardley at the helm. We can do it.
All righty. Okay, well, this is our It Chapter 2 spoiler review. I know we don't always do the best job of saying spoiler, before we do our shows, but today I figured I would kind of emphasize that just for those who might not necessarily realize how in-depth we tend to cover some of these movie reviews. So, we're returning back to present-day Derry, Maine. Adrian Mellon, we see in the beginning of the movie, which was a part of the book that wasn't included in It Chapter 1. But Adrian Mellon is beaten because he's homosexual, and he's thrown from a bridge. He ends up getting saved only to be killed by Pennywise. So something that I wanted to ask you, Kristi, this was something that they left out of It Chapter 1. It's something that was definitely in the book. And what I was just wondering, what did you think the point of this scene was? Because it didn't have a follow-up to what happened. And just for those who might not have read the book or haven't had a chance to go and investigate it online, in the books, one of the kids who was convicted of the murder, they got caught. They ended up telling the sheriff of a clown that they saw in a silver suit. The prosecutors had actually convinced him not to mention it at his trial. So the movie in itself threw this in there, but there was no follow-up. So do you feel like, either for yourself or maybe do you think someone who never read the book, did it come across to you as, why is this in here? There wasn't a follow-up to it, or did it make any difference to you?
It didn't make a lot of difference to me. I've seen kind of the chatter online where people are asking questions about what was the point of having it in there. My guess is I follow Stephen King religiously online and I read all his interviews, and he's extremely into recognizing different communities and rights. And so he, of course, wrote about this that long ago, that it was that important to him then, and I think it's just as important now. It's something that he wanted to cover. These things exist. It was disturbing to watch. A lot of people were commenting that for them it was like one of the scariest parts of the film, just seeing something like that happen to somebody, just because they're gay. And we all know that this is actually a real horror. So I think that's why there was kind of this chatter around it. Like, it didn't bother me that it was in there, and maybe it was kind of misplaced because the book is one book. This is two movies, so they did it differently. But it is what it is. I know he's just very into calling attention to things like this, so I wasn't surprised they kept it in there.
Well, I think for what it was worth, I think that it totally did need a follow-up to it, because even if you weren't paying attention, a little bit later on, we'll, if we remember, we'll touch on it a little bit later. But there was a scene that they did with Richie, and the individual who was killed on the bridge was an individual that they brought back. It was like he looked like a zombie or something like that.
Right. Yes.
A little bit later on in the movie, but I would have never, it took a second for me to be like, oh yeah, that was the guy from the beginning. But I do think something like that needs a follow-up, because some of the people that I talked to had said that they just kind of felt like, well, what happened, because for all we know, they got away with it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and they
Yeah, you know,
probably did. They probably did. And then also, I think this is one of those foreshadowing moments for Richie, I think in general, because again, something we'll talk about later about his character and who he is, and he's hiding something. And so I think that that was a way of introducing that piece of Richie in as well.
yeah, well, one of the issues that I think that you have without a follow up, especially at the beginning of the movie, is when I was watching the movie, I just kind of felt like we didn't know what the mood of the town of Derry was with
Hmm.
all of these disappearances and all of the things that were happening in it. And I just kind of felt like it almost felt like a lot through the movie that the only people who existed were the losers. And
Yeah.
I just feel like something that's got to be important. If all these things are going on, especially after 27 years, you know, would it have hurt to maybe have at least had a TV on in the background that showed that
Yeah.
people, were kind of concerned about it? So I thought
Right.
that was
Well,
something they kind of lost.
and that's kind of the thing about dairy that you see and that they kind of showed in the first one is that people don't pay much attention to the things that are going on, the murders, the kids that are dying. They're almost like they have one of those like dog cones around their neck. It's like this disease or this like shadow fog over the town where they're almost kind of oblivious to these deaths. I mean, they are enough to, recognize them and then they just kind of move on with themselves. So I think this was just another piece of that where, like in the first one when oh my gosh, what's the main character, the kid that whose brother died. What is his name? Bill.
Bill.
When Bill is in front of that lady's house and like, or when it was his little brother who was dying and the lady was just kind of piddling around and not even paying attention that this little boy is being pulled into a gutter. It's just those types of things. I think the town itself just turns a blind eye to all this violence, and that's like a blanket of like amnesia that it has over the town. That's kind of my guess on
Oh,
why
definitely,
things don't get
definitely.
blown up like they do, like they would anywhere else. And I would just assume this was just another type of story. And I think it's kind of that introduction of it is here and people are getting evil and ugly and everybody else just kind of ignores it.
Yeah, but those are the type of the nuanced things that you'll read in a book. This is a movie.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to kind of put it out there plain.
Agreed.
And I kind of think that, they kind of dropped the ball on it. But moving on. So
They could
Mike
have paid a little more attention to this story and done
oh,
with that
yeah.
a little other things, but we'll talk
Yeah,
about that later.
absolutely. So Mike Hanlon overhears, the incident that happened on the bridge on a police scanner. He ends up rushing to the scene. He ends up seeing some words written on a pillar up under the bridge. What did it say again? Because honestly, I totally forgot what was written on the
Like
pillar.
come home or
Oh
come
yeah, yeah,
was it
yeah.
come home?
It was something. Come home, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken.
Come home,
Um,
come home, come home. It was like I think they were saying that over and over again from what I remember.
Yeah, so he ends up seeing that and he realizes that it has resurfaced. He ends up calling the other members of the Losers Club, Bill, Ben, Beverly, Richie, Eddie, and Stan. He calls all of them back to Derry. So we kind of get some scenes that literally briefly shows us what they were up to. So Bill, he's a writer whose most notable book apparently had a bad ending, which is something that they remind him of throughout
It's funny.
throughout the movie. Hell, maybe it even foreshadowed the
Yeah.
weak ending to the movie itself. But anyway, we'll get to that a little bit later. Ben is a rich CEO. Did it say in the movie at all what he was the CEO of?
He was an architect. He had like an
Okay.
architecture firm. Only, I mean, they were very vague about it, but only I remember it from the book that he was obsessed with building when he was a kid, and then he did go on to be a really successful architect.
Yeah, because I couldn't remember. I remember, during that scene, it was showing that one of the people that were on the board was talking about putting up walls, but I don't think
Yeah.
in the movie, I can't remember if they explicitly said that he was an architect. Like you, I remembered it
Right.
from the book. So we've got Beverly. She's the wife of an abusive husband. Did they say in the movie what she did?
You know what? It was like she was a mom and husband team of a successful company, and I don't remember her I thought she was like an actress or a model or something in the
I thought it
book.
was like a fashion designer or something
Yeah,
like that. Or am I
and
tripping?
I remember her having like a really abusive husband, but I don't it didn't. So I think they changed her career, which this is an interesting. Like when we finish talking about what everybody does, I have an interesting piece that I kept thinking about through the movie that they never. I didn't feel like they addressed. So
Oh yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the crazy things about one of the scenes, like when we were introduced to Beverly, one of the things that they showed you that was that she was in an abusive relationship.
hmm
But I found it kind of odd that, she's in that type of a relationship and that type of a situation, and for some reason she thinks she can skip out in the middle of the night with no smoke. You know what I'm saying?
right.
Like really, like is this really, like, you know what I mean? Like I didn't really. That just came across kind of weird. But as we all probably could have suspected, whether you read the book or not. Richie, he ends up becoming a comedian.
hmm
I thought that worked. And then you've got Eddie, who is probably, Eddie, young Eddie, along with young
Richie.
Beverly Marsh,
Oh,
played by
Beverly.
Sophia Lillis. Those were like my two favorite characters in the movie. I give Eddie the edge because he's just more, he's just kind of more out there.
hmm He
But
was
he's
my
in
favorite of this movie. I loved his character. He was
me too.
so great, and he made the movie for me this time. Like this time around, like his adult character to me was just hysterical. I don't know what it was. It was like he married his mother. You know what I mean? He was almost funnier to me than Richie, and then him and Richie's banter through the whole movie just killed it. Like I loved it. It was great.
And I think him being into risk management was a
Hysterical.
great kind of a job for him, especially
Totally.
considering that's all he did as a young man is like
Totally.
assess different
And all
risk
his
and
mother did, it was just
yep.
like all around him all the time. So it was like a perfect, career venture for him.
And Stan and I, you know, apologies for not putting this in the show notes. I can't remember like
Mm-mm.
what did he do in the books? Do you
I
remember?
don't remember because he killed himself early on in the book too. So I have no
Yeah,
idea. I
I
don't
can't.
remember.
I probably should have Googled it, but they didn't really
Mm-mm.
touch on that really in the movie because I think they were like planning a vacation when we were introduced to him and he
Yeah.
got that call.
Yep.
So all are amnesiac, or all pretty much amnesia about their
Right.
childhoods, and they're of course disturbed by the calls because of course it's been 27 years, and Mike gives them a call back, and they
Mm-hmm.
weren't expecting it, and of course certain things are triggered when Mike calls, but they all pretty much quickly agree to return. So Stan, who we were just talking about, he started being affected by his PTSD. He ends up committing suicide in a bathtub by slitting his wrists. Um, and the remaining members end up just traveling to Derry, and they reunite at a local restaurant. They eat, drink, and they talk, and everything's all good. Um, all of their previous memories while they're at the restaurant reconnecting
Mm-hmm.
of Derry and Pennywise, they end up slowly returning. And as the night goes on, it ends up taking a sobering turn
Yeah.
somewhat when conjurings and a haunted note from their fortune cookies ends up being put together, which has the phrase, "Guess Stanley could not cut it." Now, they didn't really know what that means until a little bit later on, but they pretty much freak out about all the things that are going on. And one of the funny scenes of the movie was, the waitress coming in to check on them. They're making all of this noise. And then
Banging the table.
you've got like
So
Mike
funny.
slamming the chair.
Oh
But
God.
it's also kind of funny that they would do that. And, I guess everything was cool. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well,
She's like,
but
everything okay here?
I thought that the fortune cookie spelling out, guess Stanley could not cut it. I thought that that was pretty cool. And this
Mm-hmm.
is one of the things early in the movie that we realized was they spent their money really well as far as the special effects are
Yeah.
concerned, because um, a lot of those, a lot of those creatures and the effect of them busting out the fortune cookies were pretty cool.
So one of the things that they have a conversation in the book, and I don't remember if it's at dinner or if it's at right after the dinner, but it's something that they mention a couple of times that they did not talk about in the movie, and I felt like it was such an interesting facet to the story, and I was kind of surprised they didn't even just mention it quickly. Is they have a pretty in-depth conversation about how they're all super successful and like some of them are famous. Like they all, none of them failed
Except
as
Mike.
people. Well, yeah, but that was his job, was to stay back there and like take in and wait for it to come back. But, you know, they're having this in-depth conversation about why why are they all so successful? And I mean, the blatant answer is that so when it comes back, they're less likely to want to come back. They're successful.
Yeah.
They've got these huge careers. They're kind of have amnesia about the whole thing, and they're less likely. The more successful they are, it is thinking the less likely they'll want to leave all of that and come back and deal with this horror. So I just thought it was a really interesting thing, and they did talk about it a lot in the book, and so I was really surprised they didn't mention anything about it in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's surprising to me as well. Now, my memory of the book probably is not as robust as yours might be. It's been a while. There's certain things that do stick out about the
Hmm.
book that I'll remember. I tried to kind of go to Wikipedia and kind of like refresh myself on some things, but you already know like a lot of the material that's on there is pretty, short.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
and not. But as we mentioned earlier, everybody started freaking out with the hallucinations and all of those things that were going on. But they end up, realizing, as their memories start coming back, that, hey, the stuff is not real. And that's something that Mike explicitly says while they're in the restaurant, which is apparently something that they all forgot a little bit later on in the movie. But on the way out of the restaurant, the losers run into a little kid named Dean who was a fan of Richie's, and it was a really, that was one of the funny exchanges of you know, of the movie is just seeing after that, the PTSD coming back, and then the little kid wanting a picture, and Richie's going off. Pretty much, my interpretation was he probably thought the kid was Pennywise or something.
Yeah, that he did. He surely did because the way he was talking to him was
So,
funny.
so that was a pretty cool scene. So after they realized that they were hallucinating, they all kind of leave the restaurant to kind of like air themselves out and to get themselves together. So they make the decision to call Stan, and they're informed of his suicide, which happened the previous day. Now, something that is mentioned a little bit later on when you're actually watching the scene, you have Beverly kind of saying that he died in a bathtub right
Hmm.
before his spouse, um, you know, told her that. So that a real bummer, you know what I'm saying, to be
Hmm.
able to come out of the restaurant and find out that literally the day before, Stan had killed himself. So overall, once we, the reintroduction to these characters as adults, do you think that the reunion itself was pretty solid? And let me kind of connect this to it as well. Did you think that the reunion was solid? And I think you mentioned earlier. You said that, oh gosh, that Eddie was your
Yeah,
favorite character from the
yeah.
previous one,
Hmm.
and
From
I think
this
it's
one, this one,
oh, from this one. Okay, so
yeah.
who was your favorite from chapter one?
Um, Probably Bill. Just the kid, the kid going through his what he's gone through and losing his brother, and just I really, really felt for him. And then Beverly too, because holy shit, I mean, that was. I always think about like as a child going through. I mean, I grew up in a house that for all intents and purposes, my parents again still the same say the same thing was haunted, and it was nothing, not even close, not even a morsel of fear experience like what these people went through, these kids went through, and it just like, can you imagine this fucked up way you would grow up, And as we were watching the movie this time, I was thinking about Beverly in the bathroom when the blood's everywhere and her dad can't see it. And she's like covered in blood, like, and then the sink's talking. And I'm like, man, so I really liked both of their characters in the first film.
Yeah, I think it's cool. This almost seems like it was a blessing that as they got older and moved away from Derry that they
Yeah.
didn't really remember it.
I would
But
want to forget for sure.
one of the things that I felt like the movie kind of, let me down with is just the fact that I think that the adults were way less interesting. I think that we should have learned a little bit more about them. And I also feel with, the almost 3 hour runtime, there were certain things that they focused on that they really didn't have to sit on that much because I do feel like the adult versions really were a lot,
Yeah.
less interesting than the kids, but it is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of things I didn't remember about the book, and then there was weird little details that I did remember, like the whole talking about the success and then the different characters and stuff. So I went into it already having their characters developed because they do go into a lot more of their adulthood in the book, and they're, yes, they're really successful, but they're all suffering in one way or another with, like, Richie had issues. They all still had problems, even though they were, really successful in their career. So I kind of went into the movie already knowing the characters. So it wasn't a big deal for me that they didn't get into much detail. But I do wish they would have taken more time in the middle and put it at the beginning so you could get a little bit more about who they were as adults, even though, they tried to do, of course, we knew Bill's marriage was kind of, we don't know what's going on there. She's saying, he sucked, and, they're kind of going back and forth about the book. And then, just like, of course, Eddie's married his mother, so he's still going through the same thing he went as when he was a kid. And, so you just get a little bit of a sense and an idea of it, but you don't get as much, details as you do in the book. So, but I already knew those. So I understand why people would be upset that they didn't get as much character development from the adults as they would have liked, for sure.
So after everything that went down in the restaurant, and then after finding out that Stan had committed suicide the previous day, Richie and Eddie decide to leave, which seems to be pretty reasonable
Good
once all
idea.
these
Yeah.
things start coming back. So they decide to leave while Mike reveals that he met. He reveals this actually to Bill, that he met with a Native American tribe who showed him the ritual of Chud and a way of destroying it once and for all. And one of the best scenes that I think that that was in the whole movie was the scene of Bill and Mike looking into the history of how it came and destroyed the native tribes with the things that they most feared. And the other thing, Mike was there, 27 years after, and he remembered everything except what they did 27 years earlier,
Yeah.
to essentially defeat it. I mean, let's be real. We can kind of skip to this. I mean, we're going to, finish going through the movie, but I mean, they basically did what they did in the previous movie. Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Again. But uh, the Bill and Mike scene, when they were looking at the ritual of Trud and kind of seeing the history, I thought that was probably the coolest sequence in the movie. How'd you think about it?
I liked it. I wouldn't say it was my favorite, but I did enjoy it. And honestly, I have no recollection of this in the book at all. Like, at all. So I was like, it was like, what? I was like, oh, okay. I had no memory of that at all. Although I was kind of like, I mean, Mike, like, drugged Bill to get him to see, which I get why he did it, because he was like desperate. Everybody was leaving and he needs somebody to see and understand. But damn, can you imagine, like, haven't seen somebody in 27 years and, he drugs you. So it was a little bit like, okay. But, Bill stuck it out. And once he saw everything, was like, okay, yeah, I'm on board. I won't leave. But it was solid, and I like how they kind of incorporated that it's been around since the beginning, and of course, then, there was going to be this confrontation with earlier tribes before, us English came and took everything. So I thought it was a really interesting way of showing how to defeat the monster, for sure.
So this is something else, and I'm actually looking at some notes, and I actually had left something blank about one of the characters that was in the movie. It wasn't really that important, but as we go on, probably going to have to hope that you can pull this name out of your memory bank. But Bill and Mike end up convincing Richie and Eddie to stay and finish what they had started as kids. And then we go to a flashback which shows Henry Bowers escaping the sewers in the first movie and getting arrested for the murder of his father. And that sequence um, was pretty damn cool because it
Yeah.
shows him sliding out and then all of the body parts coming out of all those kids, and that was
Mm-hmm.
a pretty cool sequence. So, but we also got an additional part of it actually showing him getting arrested for the murder of his father, and then of course he was like put into an asylum, and in the present day, it
Mm-hmm.
kind of shoots back to, of course, him in the mental hospital, and it shows him escaping, essentially with the help of it. Um, it ends up conjuring up like a reanimated version of the was that character Belch? He was the one who had who was doing like the flamethrower thing in the first one, but I don't think
Yeah.
that was Belch, right? Belch was the
I
one who got his
can't
face bit.
remember. I
I
can't
really can't remember.
remember. Yeah, you
Me
got me
neither.
there. Can't
Well,
remember.
I feel like a heel because it's almost like,
Oh,
well, why didn't
whatever.
you? I didn't, why didn't you do? But anyway, that was the part that I probably could have left out of this summary because ultimately, it really didn't matter. But this was one of those things where if they did not know the flashback, you wouldn't know who the hell that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yep.
that character coming out. But for the people who don't remember, he was one of Henry Bowers' friends in the first one of the ones whose throat got slit
Mm-hmm.
by Henry. In the car, which was a scene that I don't even think that they had in the movie. I think it was a deleted scene,
Okay.
if
Okay.
I'm not mistaken. So, so we find out for the ritual to work, each loser must have an artifact from their past to place in a piece of ancient pottery, which Mike had, a little bit earlier when he was showing Bill, the visuals and of what happened. He actually had drugged Bill somewhat with some type of a root that kind of helps to open him up to kind of have saw those
Mm-hmm.
hallucinations of the ritual of Chud. So essentially they have to go through this ritual. They all have to have an artifact
Yeah.
and they place it into the pottery that Mike got from the Native Americans. So Beverly ends up going to her old home and finds a love letter that Ben wrote for her, though she still believes Bill had written it. And so,
Now, here's where that lady, that old lady, that is one of my favorite sequences of the
that was
film.
good. Yeah.
That old lady was crazy, like crazy looking. I mean, honestly, like that was really good. And they did good with that. It freaked me the fuck out. Like I was creeped out to the hilt on when she, and I had even seen that in the trailer, and I still just her creeping around naked in the background. It's so
But
crazy.
but in hindsight, you watch
Uh,
the trailer really doesn't. You know what I'm saying? You
no,
think you kind of know, but then when you
no.
watch the movie, that was actually one of the some great effects too.
It was, and I mean,
Stomping out of there, that was cool.
when that started happening and I was watching that part of the movie, I literally sat there and wonder and was like, how does a human write this? Like, this is so insane that somebody thinks this shit up. I mean, he is a genius in horror. Like, I can just fangirl over Stephen King all day long. I mean, every piece of this movie, especially when you're reading it in a book, because there is nothing scarier than what the human mind can imagine. Just
Yeah,
picturing this crazy shit in your head is even scarier than seeing it on the screen. But finally, we're in a place where people are actually doing right by his work. And so I was just watching that come to life, and I was like, holy shit. I can't.
yeah.
And she's just kind of sitting there like, huh, yeah, okay, so it looks like you're the daughter of it. Okay, interesting. And I'm like, run, girl, get the fuck out of there.
Now, now, even we all know that the template for what's going on in this movie is
Yeah,
obviously like Stephen King, but I think in this movie Stephen King wrote. It was something that we talked about on the show before, but he had
right.
wrote a scene for the movie.
Yeah, what
But
was it?
you definitely have to give hell for all I know. It might it might have been the scene with him
Where
and Bill, and I'm not sure,
that's
but
what I
I'll
was
find it
wondering if it was the
and
one he was
yeah.
in. Yeah.
And we'll follow up on this, but even though King had the basic template, as we all know, the different formats of writing for a book and writing for a movie is different. So I will give them credit for some of the things that I
Yeah.
felt like um, that they did right, and it was definitely kind of realizing, this book
Yes.
to television for general audiences. Because let's just be real here, overwhelming majority of people who watch this didn't read no damn book.
No.
You know what I mean? So
No.
you've got to like, make it in a way that, someone who's just diving in can kind of get it and kind of follow
Yeah.
it. But something that we mentioned earlier, if you didn't see the first one, this one's probably, probably not
Yeah.
going to make,
Not make a lot of sense.
a ton of sense. I mean, even with the flashbacks, it's not going to make a lot of
No.
sense.
But that's the great part about his movies is, I mean, we all, appreciated Stephen King, you and I when we were younger because that was our generation but knew the movies sucked. I mean, there was just no amount of ways to make his movies good in the time that we were young. And so it was such a frustration for me every time a new Stephen King movie would come out, Christine, Cujo. I mean, they just sucked. They couldn't get it. And so for real fans and just people that aren't even aware of his books, I think both enjoy what he can create because it's just so different. It's such a different horror. The movies, these aren't the typical shit that you come into with horror. There's not slashers, there's not zombies. I mean, this is like legit new themes of horror, even from, books from 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Like he's the master of horror, in my opinion. Like I just fangirl watching his stuff finally be made decently on a screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we track the rest of the losers and their quest for the artifacts, we see Bill. He ends up going to the storm drain where Georgie was killed, and he recovers his paper boat before meeting the boy who we saw earlier in the restaurant scene in the first act, Dean.
Poor
Who
kid.
tells Bill this kid actually lives in Bill's old house, and
Yeah.
he actually mentions to Bill that he hears you know voices and stuff. And I'm sitting there saying, so Bill, he's kind of reaching in the drain, and you get a cool little CGI sequence of hands running up, running up his arm. But like in my head, I'm like, are these artifacts? Like a lot of these artifacts, I mean, they're like literal physical things there. And I'm sitting there saying, ain't no goddamn paper hat lasting 27 years in no damn sewer. But I think that, I guess you have to kind of let your mind go on that. But that sequence in itself and Bill's concern for Dean when he saw him watching him talking in the sewer, and he's like, hey, let me tell you something, you need to get out of here. Totally freaking out the kid. And there's a scene where the kid is riding off on the skateboard, but he's crossing a street and isn't looking. And I was like, are they about to pull an okie doke and like a car or something's gonna smash that kid?
I thought that too. I was like, oh, he's gonna get nailed by a bus or something. Yeah. Man, I felt so bad for Bill because it just showed just how tortured he still was by the loss of his brother and how he felt responsible. And of course, he's hearing, voices tell him that he's responsible, literally from his little brother, who's it. And just his journey with this poor kid, trying to save this kid, and the poor kid's like, you're freaking the fuck out of me. And it was just sad. It really makes you feel like this guy is clearly not over. And how do you get over that? I mean, that was really heart-wrenching to watch.
Yeah, and and there was actually, there's actually a sequence that was kind of, I don't want to say it was shoehorned in, but it was a short sequence of a little girl, in the bleachers, which is kind of probably the best Pennywise scene that was in the movie.
Oh man, it was sad.
It was messed up. Bill Skarsgård, which is one of the reasons why I wish that we would have had him and his physical style of acting a little bit more prominent in this one, because definitely not as much.
Agreed.
As was as was in the first movie. But I thought that sequence with the little girl, with him basically enticing her to come closer,
playing on her biggest self, being very insecure about the birthmark on her face, and playing into that and getting her to come closer, and he'll take the oh god.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that's kind of cool. I think you're breaking up a little bit because I can't really.
Can you hear me now? Good.
I can hear you now, but I think the cool thing is that they don't really do cutaways, so you actually see him like totally, totally grabbing this girl by
Munching on her face.
the yeah. So as the gathering of the artifacts continues, Ben goes to the high school that he went to, and he finds his old yearbook page, which Beverly was the only person to sign. And that was the page that he already had because it was in his wallet, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Which to me kind of made no sense that we had to go there, but which is kind of cool. Now that is what you call an artifact because he kept that with him for 27 years, so it was just so obvious that would be what he would use. And
him
then
and
we get
him and Beverly's artifact made sense to me. So like hers, she had kept like hidden away. That makes sense to me. His, he had kept. It made sense to me. Everybody else's, I was kind of like,
yeah,
eh.
it's kind of weird because we see Eddie going back to the pharmacy that we saw in It Chapter 1 when they were younger, and he ends up recovering an inhaler where, of course, the same pharmacist and bubblegum chewing daughter are still there working, seemingly stuck in a time warp because the hairstyles and the fashion is exactly the same, which was, but it was kind of a treat to see them. So later on in that sequence, Eddie is led downstairs where he hallucinates that his mother is in danger from the same disease monster that he saw in It Chapter 1. He ends up overcoming his fear and choking the monster out, getting splashed in the face with black and pus in the process. And there was a great musical cue in that sequence, which I thought really worked.
Yeah, man, I gagged during that. That was disgusting. When that he got, it was all over him. Ugh.
And the fact
so gross.
And the fact that he's like, or at least growing up, he was like a germaphobe and things like that.
Yeah.
That's what made it so funny. But after that sequence, he ends up walking out of the pharmacy covered in that goo, and of course, nobody even asks what the hell happened to you. But Richie, this is a sequence that's kind of interesting because I want to get your opinion on this. So we see Richie looking for his artifact, and then we get a flashback after he finds a game token. So he has this flashback of having a great time with Henry Bauer's cousin. And then,
who was a cutie.
And then, they were actually having a good time. Richie ends up reaching for a coin. He wanted him to play again. And then he puts the coin in Henry Bauer's cousin's hand, and then he rubs the palm of it. Like anybody who's of a certain age, I remember back in the day, if you gave someone dap or you touched their hand and then you rubbed your finger across it.
I did not know that. I did not know that. Like, so that you writing that, I'm like, what? I had no idea.
It was totally a thing,
wow.
Especially in the 80s. If it just meant you were interested in them or that you wanted to hook up with them. And when he did that in the movie, I immediately knew what it was. I was like, wow, that was kind of a throwback because that was one of the reasons why when Henry showed up, that was why his cousin started calling him a fag.
I had no idea.
Because he did the finger rub thing.
I remember because he was like, "Why are you looking at me like that, weirdo? What are you, gay?" And blah 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 blah, and then starts freaking out. But I didn't know it was because of the hand thing.
Because of the hand. That's why that's why they focused on it. They wouldn't just focus on it for him to give him a coin. You see him do that little rub thing.
So I didn't even notice it.
Yeah, but like I said, I'm just old, so I remember that was one of the
Well, I'm older than you. I just didn't know. I had no idea.
So that was interesting, but of course they kind of, of course Henry's cousin kind of goes off, and Henry ends up scaring, Richie out of the arcade, and essentially there is a sequence where he runs to a bench out in this field where that Paul Bunyan statue is. The Paul Bunyan statue ends up animating itself and starts chasing him. And that was a pretty dope sequence. I mean, the effects were really great in that sequence. And then eventually we see Pennywise showing up on the shoulder of the Paul Bunyan singing that Richie has a secret. You see how all this stuff is kind of... And during that sequence, we see the young man who was killed at the beginning of the movie. He kind of walks by and, looks at Richie. So that's who that was. But
Yeah.
yeah, that is a trip. I mean, they pulled one out of the archives though with that rubbing the finger across the palm.
Totally.
That was a trip. So eventually, all the losers end up getting their artifacts, and they end up using a shower cap from their childhood clubhouse that Ben had set up, and they end up using that as Stan's artifact. And then we also find out that Mike's artifact is a rock that Beverly threw that started their fight against the Bowers gang. The famous rock fight scene, which is famous for not only It Chapter 1, but also in the book. But I kind of felt like, Mike's artifact should have been that air gun that he used in the beginning of Chapter 1 and that showed up in It Chapter 2. That was the gun that Bowers had put to his head before he chucked him, down the well. But that was a common item that we saw that was associated with Mike from movie. And I'm like, if anything should have been his artifact, it should have been that air gun, which we didn't even see until a scene with Bill when he's confronted by Georgie in the flooded basement, which is actually another callback. But I think it's a weird choice to give that air gun that Bill never, I don't even remember him touching it in the first movie. It was always attached, that was Mike's deal. So I think it's weird that they wouldn't make that his artifact, and instead they actually showed, Bill using the gun before, he kind of snapped out of it and stopped being, scared of Pennywise later in the movie. So we end up having one thing come full circle because that's what It Chapter 2 was. A lot of the things from the first movie, a lot of these gags and bits, things, like I said, they come full circle. We end up seeing Mike being confronted by Henry Bowers in the library. And Mike ends up slamming Bowers through a table, and then there's a struggle. And Henry ends up getting the upper hand on Mike, only to be killed by Richie with the axe that we saw a little bit earlier in the movie when Mike took Bill to see the origins of it. And I just kind of felt like, you got to give Mike that kill. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That, and then, Eddie got stabbed in the face, from him, unexpected. So it just kind of surprised me that that's how it played out. But yeah, I mean, it was, I agree with you.
Yeah, it's just totally weird. If my memory serves me correctly, I remember what the specificity was of the injury, because Mike was injured, in the book, and of course, Bowers died. But I think in the book, didn't they leave it kind of ambiguous? Because wasn't there a struggle, and then Bowers ends up getting stabbed or something like that, and that's how he died or something like that?
I do not remember. So many weird things that I remember, and then so many huge things I don't remember. I'm like, wow, okay, it's like I'm watching a whole new story. But I agree with you. Whenever Yardley and I watched this movie together, and you leaned over and you were like, "That should have been Mike's kill." I'm like, totally agree with you on that one.
It's the same thing, because it kind of becomes full circle to like him chucking him down the well, and we were like, "Man, he die or whatever." And let's be real, like Mike was in a lot better shape than Henry, and I know people are gonna say, "Well, hey man, you just never know these crazy folks, they strong and all that shit." Well, you can be crazy and still get your ass whipped. You know what I'm saying? So just don't really see how that would have been like a real match. But Henry did have a knife, and if you have a weapon and the other person doesn't, that does give you the advantage.
And Henry always, like, anytime you ever saw him come out on top, he either had a gang of people helping him or he was catching people by surprise. He really wasn't all that fucking tough. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't somebody that was taking people head on and really coming out on top. He was like a little pussy. So I just not shocked at all.
I remember he used to get his rocks off by like killing animals and shooting cats, and that was one of the things that was kind of that was highlighted in the book. Now, something that we discussed in a previous show was about their use of CGI on the younger, kids. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, to me, for the most part, they were still lanky. They didn't really look drastically different. But the young man who played Henry Bowers, you can airbrush that face, but those guns.
He looked like a man. He did.
got even more swollen. So you were like, you couldn't CGI that
Yeah.
out because he's been working out.
Yeah.
I know, I
That
know that I got.
and Finn Wolfhard, he looked a lot older. Just you could just see that even a little bit amount of baby facing wasn't hiding the fact that he's serious. He's going through some serious testosterone changes. So it was cracking me up, like them trying to get him back. I mean, he was really tall, and there's no hiding that. So it was like definitely like supposed to be like a few months later, and he's like a foot taller than everybody else. So I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, he's like that kid, whatever, Wright Hempstead that played Bran Stark.
Yeah,
In Thrones.
totally.
Sudden Hodor ain't dragging his ass around.
Hodor's like,
I
I
mean,
ain't holding the door anymore.
so, uh, that was my only beef. It just seems like they took away a lot of big moments from
Yeah.
Mike. I don't even think they really gave an explanation because in the he was a librarian, right? And I don't
Right.
think that they said that he was saying that he lived in the library, but I don't think that he specifically said that he was a town librarian. Do you remember that?
No, it seemed like he was just creeping up into the library attic. Like they didn't really talk about him as a leadership or doing any kind of a career. And honestly, I was a little bit disappointed about their progression with his story with the Native American tribe. It was like, how did you get like there was just this so I met a Native American and he told me everything. Like really? That's how it happened? Like that was all? Like you just walked up to somebody. They didn't really dive into it well to me.
Well, I don't think that they dove into it well, but I think that they kind of explained it a little bit. He was saying that he did his research, which led him to that tribe, which he found out was living on Oscar. So, you know what I'm saying? But I agree with you. I think that they should have gotten, a lot deeper. But I just felt like Mike has gotten a short shrift going back to chapter 2. He was the one who discovered it and all of that stuff. They gave that storyline to Ben. This one, they don't even say that he's a library person. He's just a, a crazy motherfucker who lives in the attic, of the library. You could make him the goddamn librarian. You know what I mean? Just don't make him crazy ass Mike. And that shit was just kind of lame to me. I'm like, why the hell? You know what I mean?
I would have loved if they would have started the movie with his journey with the Native Americans and then gone into the official start of the movie. Like if they would have just shown his like research and dealing with that story piece, I think would have been a lot more interesting because he learned all of that, as an adult, but before all the crazy started happening. So it would have been a great kind of segue into, the beginning of it with the journey of him learning about how to kill him. I just felt like they could have handled it. If you're going to do a movie, that's, probably not how they did it in the book, but I just felt like if you're going to do a movie, that would have been an awesome way to start it.
Yeah, so after they gather all of the relics, Bill ends up seeing a skateboard rolling down some steps and realizes that Pennywise is going after Dean, the young man that he saw in front of his old house, and the young man that was talking to Richie in the restaurant. So he ends up going to the Dairy Carnival, and he ends up finding him, but he's unable to save him from being devoured by Pennywise. And when Pennywise got his ass, it was just an explosion of blood. So he just totally got destroyed.
They didn't even fuck around with that one. It was like, okay.
Yeah, we don't even have any time for any extra. We're just going to show him, exploding. But
so here's a question.
Okay.
Why do you think that it would warn Bill about the kid?
I probably, probably taking a chance that was something that like would draw him in there. Yeah, it's just, he's just always trying to trigger people and, get them in as weak of a state as possible.
True. And he did go by himself. He was like, okay, fuck this. Like, that's it. But I just wondered, I'm like, what was the point of that?
Let's be real. You could take that kid out and it changes nothing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, okay, I get like Bill's struggle, but of course he's going to die. It just, I knew that kid wasn't dead from the second the skateboard went. I was like, yeah, he did.
But also remember, with his PTSD and when he actually saw the kid on his own, it was at the storm drain that his younger brother, Georgie, died in. So I think that there was kind of a connection of he felt like he needed to protect that little kid because he didn't get a chance to protect his brother. So I think it was some of that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so he kind of latched on to the idea of, even though he blamed himself for it, which he totally shouldn't. I do.
No, yeah.
He felt like he had a responsibility to try to save that kid that he felt like was endangered. So, essentially, traumatized by his failure to save both Georgie and Dean, he ends up returning to the Neibolt house to murder it on his own, just like in It Chapter 1. And the exact same way, the rest of the losers end up showing up on cue to help him. And, they kind of go through some lines of dialogue that they had said back when they were younger. And, of course, the more that they remember, it kind of accelerates, them emotionally to kind of know what they're going to be going up against when they get in the house. So they end up entering the house, and and they encounter other little callbacks to the first film. You've got Beverly and the bathroom scene, which you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
When the bathroom fills up with blood, it's not just all over the walls. And you have Bill being confronted in the flooded basement by Georgie, and Pennywise twisting out of a cabinet, which was one of the cool scenes from It Chapter 1. But this time, he crawls out with the head of Stan with arachnid legs, and Stan's
God,
head.
can you imagine?
That was pretty
Damn.
cool.
I mean, that's fucked up. Like, really fucked up.
It is. I really thought that
shit.
really thought that worked, and also, of course,
Hell
when
yeah.
the legs started coming out the side.
Come on. And his face, like,
Yeah, it's pretty.
damn. I mean, that's next level shit right there.
Yeah,
Really.
I thought it was really well done, and
Mm-hmm.
just it was definitely one of the most creepy parts. And I actually think that they knew that they kind of had gold doing it that way, considering that was one of the scenes that a lot of people, at least that I had talked to, felt like that was a very cool scene in the first chapter, him twisting himself out. So as we all know, that each of these encounters, said that they have pretty much ended with them overcoming their fears, which is what we already knew that they had to do to kill it, in the first place. So the losers end up performing the ritual, and it appears to be a success. But a giant version of Pennywise with arachnid legs ends up pressuring Mike into revealing to the losers that he never told them that all the natives died, and that they never completed the ritual because their fear-fed it ended up destroying them. But here's my thing. I don't like how they were calling Mike a liar. He didn't lie to them. He just didn't tell them. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. He was 1,000% right not to tell them.
Yeah.
That everybody died, but I don't really like how they're like, hey, you lied. I was like, no, motherfucker, I just didn't tell you the rest of the story. And he does kind of say, hey, the reason why they died was they didn't believe and they didn't overcome his fear, and that was something that he ended up getting them
to do.
Getting them to do. But it's almost like that's one of the things that that's kind of what they did in the first one. But yeah, that is a total trip though. And I think this sequence where when Pennywise comes out and he's very large and he's got the the arachnid legs and whatnot, I was kind of disappointed that they did that. Like, I get that he had to be big for them to, as we'll find out later, before they made him feel small, but this was like their last opportunity to kind of give us some Bill Skarsgård just doing. I mean, even if he got big and got small or whatever, I just wanted to see Skarsgård kind of do his thing, and I felt kind of disappointed we didn't get that.
Okay, agreed. And here's why. I felt like, and this is very unusual for me to say because you know me, I'm always like monster, monster, monster. I didn't feel like it had enough psychological crazy to it because that's kind of what it is. Like, it's he's so into the psychological piece that really fucks with your head, and that's the most terrifying part, that it really relied on this whole big monster spider thingy, and I was just kind of like, I would have preferred more of like Stan's head psychological crazy at the end. Like, if you're gonna kill this monster, he's putting all he's got out there, and a spider isn't it. you know? Like, that's just my opinion. I just felt like it would have been better if, you know, he would have taken on voices of, like, you know, Beverly's father and Georgie, and, like, really fucking with them, like, truly fucking with them.
Oh yeah.
And a big spider, I'm sorry, he would have taken more kids out. Like, there, he was
Oh yeah.
not, like, this was not a, it wasn't like, I really, and I love the story so much, but this piece, I agree with you, is a little weak, but I still love this, you know, story. It just, that piece, I was kind of like, eh.
Well, I mean, I, I thought it was weak just based off of like to me, you shouldn't put the characters in a scenario where the audience is like, well, damn, you know, could have easily have just, killed them. Like you
Yeah.
put them in a scenario where there's at least a chance for them to kind of. It just seemed weird to watch them jogging in a circle. Wow.
Totally.
Like,
We've been here for 3 hours. Like, seriously, this
oh
is
my
it.
gosh.
Like,
Absolutely.
yeah. Like,
And at this
that's
point,
what you
you're
got.
like, God damn.
Exactly. I
Exactly.
expect freaking fireworks. Like, this had better be an epic takedown, because I know how the book ends, but damn it, I want to see some epic craziness on the screen. And then it was just like,
Well,
you
you got the
squeeze a
money to
heart.
do it.
That's
Yeah,
it.
I know. So,
Oh, okay.
so, so the losers are put in a life or death scenario, and Richie ends up overcoming his fear of it. Kind of, I guess, the first one to really outside. Well, I guess he was the first one to like kind of stand up and be like, I'm not gonna take this no more. I'm not scared of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it freezes him with the deadlights, which was a pretty funny scene because he says one snappy word, and the next thing you know, he's tranquilized, sort of like Beverly was. But
Yeah.
just the fact that he bucked up so hard and immediately got frozen was also a pretty funny sequence in the movie. So.
And then Eddie, of course, dying.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Eddie ends up saving Richie after he's caught up in the deadlights, and he throws this fence beam that Beverly gave him right before they went into the Neibolt house. He ends up throwing that, and she basically tells him, "Hey, what did she say? It was something about like
this is a monster killer if you believe that it is." Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is kind of funny because like all of the signs leading up to them going to see it, they all knew the keys to defeating it and how not. You know what I mean? So I'm like, how the hell do you like get in there and then all of a sudden
forgot? Agreed.
That was just kind of weird, but. Eddie ends up throwing that fence beam in a pretty epic scene, and it kind of hits it in the mouth.
Yeah.
And
he was so proud of himself. Yeah.
He was so proud of himself, and he's like going over to talk to Richie, and while distracted, he ends up getting impaled
by the spider fang claw thing.
He gets impaled through the back, and I think in the book he got his arm bit off, and even in the miniseries he gets his arm bit off, and he ends up kind of bleeding out. But hey, in this world you can get stabbed right through the back of the chest and still live for what I'm saying, a little while longer. I think that losing an arm is a little bit more effective for how long he lived. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that he lived a super long time, but I think the arteries that would have been punctured, with that, it's basically it went straight through his spine, straight through his sternum. It was just like a clean shot from the back. But that was pretty sad when he got hit.
And so, I have to say, and I'm saying this because it makes so much sense, but I totally stan Richie and Eddie. Like, I think like if Richie was true to himself and Eddie wasn't committed to his mother, they could have had something.
I never saw anything in any of the films that would make me think that that's the case.
No, but there was just such this weird, like, they fucked with each other so much that it was like, it could have happened in a different time, different life, another planet. But I would have loved to have seen that, just because Eddie is miserable and married to this awful lady, and Richie's a closet gay, and it was like, would have just been wonderful.
But I don't know if we know if she was awful, though. I mean, like,
she seemed pretty awful.
She seemed annoying, but I mean, it's obvious that he married someone that was kind of similar to the person who at the time he loved, you know what I'm saying?
Like his mother. Yes. So
I thought that was cool, but and also, we kind of get the call back to, Richie carving, into the post the person that he had a crush on. Of course, we zoom out and we end up finding out that it's Eddie.
Eddie.
Okay, so as the losers regroup and Mike makes them realize that Pennywise can be killed if they make him feel smaller than he really is, they end up they end up beating this motherfucker by insulting him and telling
You're small. You have a small dick.
It's pretty fucking horrible. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, for real. Like,
I was disappointed, and I need to go back and read the book because I don't remember it being. Maybe that's the way it was, but there was more to it than that, and I just
totally more.
Oh, come on! Like and then they like grab his heart and squeeze. Like, come on.
And then I'm just like,
he dies. Man. That's it.
I'm gonna sit here and tell you. I'm gonna be honest. Like, if you sit through this damn near 3-hour fucking movie,
yes,
able to expect. Look, if you were somebody who didn't pee for 3 hours and you get this goddamn ending, bruh.
Agreed.
I would have been a sweaty, pissed off mess. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
After it was over, but I thought that the ending was pretty weak. Him just basically, shrinking down. You've got this big, awesome. You remember the effects from the first one with the kids kind of twirling up. You know what I'm saying? Towards the ceiling, and then all of the colors and all of the things. And this whole scene was very muted. There wasn't anything that really popped in it. The whole time when the losers confronted it, it just seemed kind of dry, droll.
It seemed rushed. Like,
it's just weird.
Rushed. Like, okay, now we've done all this backstory and we've gotten to this point. We just got to fucking kill him because we're out of time. That's basically how I felt. Like, there was no payoff at the end, and I was disappointed. And I'm sad to say that because I still love the movie and I'm glad that they finished it, but I'm really disappointed by the ending. That sucks. A lot of people liked it, though.
Yeah, I guess a fair share liked it, because I think before we did this show, because I think it was sitting at like 65%, or maybe it might be 63 now or something. It's pretty damn low.
Wow.
For critics wise on Rotten Tomatoes, and the user score has dropped down to about, I think the last time I looked at it, it was 80. But it seems to be kind of trending down, because it was, at one point, of course, it was 90, and then it's been kind of trending down a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if the the user score, which is us, the confirmed, and because they've got 3 different versions. You have the critics, and then I have the verified, and then they have the other version, like the user thing, which isn't verified on Rotten Tomatoes. But it's definitely been trending down. So, as we mentioned earlier, the blow that was dealt to Eddie ends up being fatal, and he dies from his injuries, despite Richie's passionate attempts to save him. So the remaining losers end up, returning to the quarry where they once swam together. This was a scene back in chapter 1 where they all had on their tighty-whities. Beverly made all of them look like punks because she was the first one to jump off, which I thought was a pretty cool scene in the first one. But they all go back there, and of course, as adults, they all jump in with all their clothes on. But
and she's the first one to jump again, like she's leading the pack again. Yeah,
she's leading the pack, but you know what I'm saying? She's like, everybody's like got their shoes on, but they do their thing, and it was a nice callback to the first one. In that moment, go ahead.
Her and Ben end up hooking up.
Yes, in that moment, Beverly, who had realized that it was Ben who wrote the letter, she ends up sharing a kiss with him, and the two end up starting a romantic relationship that we kind of see a little snapshot of, at the end of it. But this was something that also kind of was just kind of weird to me. Earlier in the movie, you see Beverly kiss Ben, and it was one of those moments where I guess you just kind of had to use your head a little bit. When they kissed, I guess the look that they gave each other was like, I don't really feel nothing with that. You know what I'm saying?
You mean
like
her and Bill?
I mean, her and Bill.
Yeah. I remember that.
I guess it was supposed to be one of those, let's kiss each other and see if there's something still there. And then they kind of pulls back and is like, I don't really feel anything. But the whole thing with her and Ben, it did. I mean, even though I think anybody who's watched television or movies, you kind of knew that the arc was going to kind of lead them to, at least trying to rekindle something that never happened,
Mm-hmm.
when they were younger. But I, I think that it's weird that as a grown ass man who's a successful architect has that bag. He's super hot, so that he's fucking been. You know what I'm saying? He's probably had his fair share of from being the chubby kid
Mm-hmm.
from and back in the day. I
Making up for lost times.
but I fucking refused to believe when they were sitting on that staircase and Beverly was trying to remember. She was like, I think I remember who did it was Bill. Ain't no grown ass man. He's like, motherfucker, I wrote that shit. Like, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why you don't just say it? Like, you know what I mean? But of course, in the movie, they make a quick distraction. But I'm sorry, like 27 years of you carrying that thing around, you're right there. I just find it hard to believe that he would just be so, I'm scared to, I'm scared to tell you. I'm like, girl, I wrote that shit. Let's just be real. Say that. But it is one of those things that when the movie is over, and actually, I think we do. This is a kind of a very important part. After their, return to the quarry, they're all swimming together. Of course, Ben and Beverly end up getting together. Richie ends up returning to the bridge where he carved his initials and those of another person. Now, of course, it's revealed that he was Eddie, that person was Eddie.
Aww.
So he ends up, what I'm saying, touching
Lost
it up.
love.
And absolutely. Hey, and like a lot of towns, small towns, like a lot of those bridges. Hey, if they're still working, we're not gonna tear none of the stuff down. So
hell no.
and we find out that Mike ends up, deciding to move out of Derry, which was something that he had mentioned, when he was younger, younger, because this was an additional scene that you had in this movie where he was saying that he wanted to move to Florida, and we didn't get to see that. You know what I'm saying? In the original It movie, it was one of those scenes that they, created just for this movie, and I thought that was kind of cool. So I'm making the assumption that Mike is going to Florida, but he ends up calling up Bill about a letter that Stan had wrote to all of the losers before his death, and it was kind of a, it was a really, I mean, this sequence, I think it was kind of mixed. A lot of people had different reactions to it, but essentially, Stan, right before he committed suicide, wrote a letter basically saying that he killed himself because all of them would have to be united, and he felt like that he would be the weakest link, and if he wasn't there, he knew that they could defeat it. I thought that was dumb as fuck. I'm just like, look, like for real. I mean, this is what it is. I mean, how do you even sound? Y'all are stronger without an extra person. A person, by the way, who was there when y'all beat the shit when y'all were kids. So now,
I didn't overthink it. I really didn't think about it.
get the fuck out of here now.
But I'll tell you what, you know what I did think of? Whenever Mike called Bill, I thought, if I was Bill and I was getting that phone call, what was the first thing you would think? I'll send that to voicemail. Thank you. I don't need any more phone calls from you.
But I love the whole cool thing about the,
It's back.
Kind of like realizations. Mike was like, "Hey man, I love you, man." Bill's like, "Hey man, I love you back." So they are close.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking is though, but like once because I think in the book they leave and then their memories go away again.
Really?
You know what I mean?
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, I
No,
think
I mean they said that their memories weren't going away. So that's what Bill and Mike were talking about was, what do you think it means that our memories haven't gone away? And he said something like, I think it means that
is dead or
yeah, or that like it's more heartfelt this time or something like that. And then Bill goes, or he's dead, and he's like, Mike's like, yeah.
But not crazy though. But Kristi, didn't it say? I don't know. I want to say that in the book. I thought that they were saying that there was hints of like
That it
with
did.
everybody leaving, and the last connective tissue to it, of course, was Mike, and with him leaving. But I mean, because to me, I think that makes it even more tragic that they overcame it, and then they remembered everything, and then they end up forgetting again.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I gotta, okay, I'm committing myself to reading the book again because I only remember bits and pieces, like really randomly strange small pieces and not really big chunks. So I got to go back and read it again for sure.
It makes me want to do it again. And first of all, I
Yeah.
was like, because I have a digital copy of it. And then I was
Mhm.
like, maybe I should get the audiobook. And I was like, that shit is 14 hours. And I'm like, I'm good. I just, I'd rather, piecemeal read it over the next
I
15 years. But
I can't imagine how fucking long the audiobook for The Stand is. It's probably like 6 months long. That is like the biggest book ever. It's like all the Encyclopedia Britannica is shoved together in one book. It's
I
huge.
think that fifth, or gosh, what was that last Harry Potter book? I think
Oh,
that audiobook was like 20 something hours.
I didn't read. I never read Harry
Uh,
Potter. No
and
desire.
Well, me neither, but I do have like downloads of like
Hmm.
the audiobook because I
Hmm.
always said, hey, maybe, I'll hear all this hype. Maybe I'll read
Maybe
it.
I'll want to listen to this for 4 days
And
straight.
days later, like probably like a decade later, I still hasn't read anything. I tried to watch the movie and it was pretty, the first one, it was pretty whack. But anyway, let's just talk about something more interesting, which is it.
So,
Um,
what's your rating?
I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Like I said,
Okay.
if it's around middle of the pack I give it a 7 out of 10 for the story and the way that it was put together. I
Hmm.
think that they could have edited better. I know good and damn well it didn't have to be almost 3 hours. And
Yeah, I agree.
I felt like one of the things that was lost, at least to me, the most was just the fact that we didn't get more of. I just wanted to find out more, a little bit more about their lives, kind of as
Yeah.
adults, instead of just, some mentions about what they do
Hmm.
and things like that. I felt like they left a lot of stuff on the table, and I felt like they did a lot of stuff that didn't pay off. And
Yeah.
uh, what I'm saying, that really didn't pay off. But I think overall, the effects and things like that were great. I think that all of the actors that they had in there were great, but
Really?
none of,
Really?
but
Really?
yeah, and mainly because, but here's the thing: I think that they were all great, but I don't think that the people who wrote it put them. They could have been better. I don't think that they were put in positions to really utilize a lot of the talent. You know what I'm saying?
Yardley, you think
That I think
all
they
the actresses too, or just actors?
yeah, like everybody. I know you want me to start
Jessica
with
Chat,
Jessica.
I want to hear you say it.
Well, here's the thing. With Chastain, remember, my fear was she was going to take over.
Yeah.
Because her and the what is his name, Machete, or whatever. They're friends. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think she had a leg up getting this role anyway. But I think that as far as distributing out the time that they gave each of the losers, I think it was damn near pretty even.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think. But I think that they could have given all of them kind of. They just could have given them more, and I think that they could have strengthened characters like Mike and just make him more interesting than just being crazy Mike. I would have loved to have seen a little bit more
Yeah.
of Eddie's world before he got in the wreck. Like, you know what I mean? I would like to see him
Totally.
interact
Yeah.
face to face with his wife. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Bill, his wife says like 2 or 3 words, and we don't know shit about her, and she was an important part of the book. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Because
Yep.
she had more of a role, and then I think the book closes out because she ends up having, being like in a catatonic state or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of, if I'm not mistaken, as an adult, at the end of that book, she's in that condition, and then when he's riding on that rocket bike or whatever, she ends up coming out of her, you
Mm-hmm.
know, out of state. So I just think that they dropped the ball on giving us more on that front. The special effects for me were great, but it's just like I can tell you, like if you go see it in VIP and you have some drinks, it's going to be a struggle.
Yeah, I was struggling. I had a couple of drinks and I was like in the middle, like, whoo. Agreed with you on all of those fronts. And then I agree with you because it's difficult because we say it was too long, but it wasn't long enough. So I agree with that in the aspect that it could have been that long with different highlights to the story. Like it would have made more sense to do something a little bit different in the middle, but they highlighted something differently and it made it a difficult movie for a little bit to get through. Also, you mentioned the bike, and it was such a huge character in the book. Silver was just this huge, like, piece of Bill, who is kind of the main character in the book, and his journey with Silver the bike, and like just his experience with this bike, and just his freedom, because he's in this he's a horrible life as a child, and then he finds this bike again. It was such a huge deal in the book. And I
Well,
mean, they did a little bit with it, but it wasn't like as big as it was in the book, which I get, because you can't go through everything that happens in the book. And I agree with you. There wasn't a lot of the adults' lives that could have been highlighted a little bit better. So I think it could have stayed the same length if they would have focused on some different things in the middle.
are you are you dropping a 300 for that bike though? Fuck no.
I mean, I get it though. It was his bike.
I'm
It was
like,
the love of his life when he was a kid. I mean, that's the thing in the book, that like it's such a huge focus, is this bike is his
300.
pride and joy.
Well, first of all, number one, there shouldn't have been any air in those tires. $300 for that dusty bike, no air in the tire. Like, it's totally raggedy. It's not even like dude tried. But however, he did get his
He's
car.
rich. He can afford it. Like, that's 300
I mean,
bucks.
it's true. He pulled his own card by talking
Yeah.
about it was his old bike and all of that stuff. So I get why Stephen King's character is like, okay, bro, I'm about to hustle you, Mr. Rich author.
Exactly.
And I thought it was funny. Not only did he get 3 bills for the bike, he got 3 bills after telling him the ending to his book.
Exactly. Well, he was going to have that bike regardless. Seriously, he was going to have it.
But to me, I agree with you. It was definitely an important thing that was in the book. And it was actually one of the scenes that I thought was kind of cool. Once he started riding it,
and it was falling apart.
It's almost like the bike kind of woke up on its own and started acting right after the rider that should have been on it the whole time comes back. I thought that was cool, but I really do wish that they would have stuck the landing. And I'm going to be honest with you, as time goes on, I don't. Do you think that this movie really has legs? I don't think it. I think that it might have a. Gosh, I think it might drop significantly next week, though.
Yeah, it's definitely like the first movie I would watch again. The second one, I wouldn't watch again. Even with the really, really strong sequences that we were talking about that were our favorites, there's just too much of the movie that I have no interest in watching. So it's not worth the 3 hours of me sitting there watching something that I'm not, like 80% of it I'm not interested in.
Yeah, and I mean, I still think overall for a horror movie, it's
totally.
You know what I'm saying? The numbers are already great, because I think the only record that it didn't break was the one that chapter 1, had set. It's definitely trending.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's number one. It's number one at the box office right now. Yeah.
But I think the timing of it is good, because I don't think that anything else that's currently in the theaters is something that's, that can really compete with it. But I do think that it'll probably have a decent drop next week. But like I said, I haven't really tracked to see what other movies are going to be coming out in the next few weeks. But
well, they really... Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
They released it at the right time. So they didn't release it in the height of like horror season, because you're right. If this was the height of the horror season, where we're in the middle of October, it would have, I don't know if it would have gotten as much attention. It was released at the right time. I give it a 7.5. Because I just love the story, and I'm happy to see it on the screen. I think they could have, like you said, we've discussed this, there were some parts I think I would have chosen to do a few different things, something different, but at the end of the day, it is Stephen King's It finished the story. It did what it was supposed to do. Some of the pieces were weak, but I still, when I compare it to other movies, it still comes out really strongly. So it's hard to I'm being picky because it's Stephen King, but when I compare it to other shit, I'm like, it's still better than that,
Look, a movie that surprised everybody that it did as good as it did, it was like that last Halloween. This was way better than Halloween today. Everybody was talking about that Halloween like it was the best thing. I'm like, that shit was...
It's all right.
Just barely okay.
Agreed.
To me, you know what I'm saying? Of course, all this stuff is subjective, but I'm just like, so even with me giving this a 7, which I think I actually gave the Halloween, maybe I gave it like a 6.5 or 6 or something like that, but I definitely enjoyed this more than that. And I think the only thing that's coming out is maybe that Black Christmas movie. Isn't that coming out soon?
I don't know when it was coming out, but it looks stupid. So.
Well, I think I'm not sure when. I'm kind of sure that it might be coming out, and it has to be coming out in the next month or so. I mean, maybe it's like in October. I feel like that might do something, but I think that this has legs, and like I said, this definitely isn't the worst horror movie that I've seen, so I'm not gonna, act like it is. But I do felt like with the goodwill and the quality, at least I felt like It Chapter One had. I think that with them having a bigger budget and actually having decent actors to come in to play the adult versions of the losers, I felt like they, you know, I kind of feel like they kind of let
could have done better.
Well, I mean,
with what they have. They have all these really big names, some pretty good named actors, and there was, they could have done better, I think.
Well, and also, sequels are, they're hard to kind of match, the first one if it did well. But I do think that I have to admit, and I know that, it's dated, but I do feel like they could have done more, mainly because the 90s version of it, that 3 hour miniseries, it had way better character development than this. And they had 2 damn movies. And I thought that the miniseries, pan it however you want, I thought did a better job of giving us an understanding of the kids and the adults way better than 6 hours of this, of It Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. But
well, yeah, I mean, but they did it they did it in the order of the book. So they did it exactly like the book story. Now they left things out, and then the effects were cheesy. I thought Tim Curry did a great job. I do believe, and this is going to cause some shitstorm, but I think Bill Skarsgård is a better Pennywise. He scares me more. He scares me more. Like, he scares me more than the original. And but you're right. There was better character development because they did it in the right sequence as the book is told. So this movie tried to chop it where it was the kid's story and then part 2 is the adult story. I don't know if it was the right choice. It works, but it really was, at the end of the day, when we look at part 2, they still had to go back and reference a lot of the kids' stuff. So what if you'd just done it the original sequence of the book and maybe paid a little bit more attention to the character development instead of having to reference back so much?
I totally agree. And along the lines of Bill Skarsgård versus Tim Curry was the Pennywise that the early 90s needed.
Absolutely. It was the best we could get at that time. He was superior, a superior horror character at that time. I mean, there is no comparison. He was awful. I was terrified of clowns already. And then I watched that and I was even horrifyingly more terrified. But Bill Skarsgård does something to the clown that the drool and the eyes, like the shining, bright, kind eyes, but the rest of his face is off. It's just this weird, like it's this, his eyes almost look like a like a cartoon character kind eye, and then his mouth is drooling and he's got these buck teeth. God, it's just this. It terrifies me. Like, something he does, he can do it, and he does it naturally. Like, have you seen him when he has interviews where he does that weird smile? Like, he was made to be Pennywise. It terrifies me. So yes, I personally believe Bill Skarsgård is the Pennywise, man. It's fucked up. So
yeah, he's definitely the Pennywise that we need right now. We'll make sure that we kind of get take from Moni the next time when she has the opportunity.
Oh, I'm definitely going to record hers for sure.
to get on the show, and I'm very curious to see what she had thought about it. And like I said, we could definitely do worse in terms of horror, but I feel good enough about this movie to give it a passing grade, a 70. Absolutely. And I definitely, I almost feel like I could see a lot of people being turned off going to the theater for 3 hours because this wasn't like, somebody had made a comparison. We're talking about, oh man, people sat in for Avengers Endgame 3 hours. I was like, man, that's a totally different situation because
Yeah.
one, it kept you, it kept you really, kind of into the story.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was 3 hours, they gave you enough consistently. And actually, I just think that they did a better job of laying out what they
Agreed.
wanted to do. We already knew about all of the characters. You know what I'm saying? So that, like, they had the advantage of people already understanding for a lot of these characters at least a little bit of their backstories, even if you didn't see all of the movies. In this, I just felt like those kids went through so much that you really did need to give us a little bit more meat. But
Yep.
anyway, that's a dead horse.
So
there.
one more question.
Yep.
I was reading an article where people were comparing this movie and saying, in a way, it's a superhero movie.
I don't even know what the hell that means.
I don't either. Like, they're saying that, like, these kids were like superheroes in the movie. I kind of was wondering what you thought about that. Like, oh, okay. Not
like,
agreeing.
hell no, they weren't superheroes because superheroes learn the lessons from goddamn before. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
true. They don't get amnesia and
like,
forget
hey,
everything.
I remember that we talked them down off the ledge the last time.
Yeah.
No, but I don't know. I would probably have to read that article. I'm pretty sure maybe they, whoever said that, there needs to be some reading behind what they said because you got to really explain. But I guess if you're just saying that they're heroes because they were people in the midst of adversity, were able to overcome their fears and do something special for the greater good, that's some superhero shit.
I guess.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I'll just maybe that's what they were saying. But
Okay.
well, and another reason why it's not a superhero movie is the ending would have been more epic than that.
Right? A lot more booms and explosions and
Give
fighting.
me, I am Iron Man all day over.
Iron
You're
Man.
just a clown. Fuck that.
Agreed. Iron Man.
You know what I'm saying? You just paid to watch a movie anyway.
True.
Who's turn? Is it your turn? Are you up for bat next week or is that
I
Moni?
think it's Moni. I can't remember, to be honest with you. Wait, day.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is Moni. And she's not here, so we will get back with you on the theme for next week. But we'll have a bonus episode that drops this week that Moni and I did while drunk and looking on Reddit about demons, which is really stupid, but we figured we're going to have like this back show just in case we need it. And so we have that coming, and then we have this one. I wanted to drop this one first because it is more prominent and people are talking about it. I think we need to drop it. So that's what's coming.
Well, Chris, let me ask you this. So, what scene in this movie, and then we'll go ahead and close out. What was the scene that stood out the most to you in chapter 2?
I'm gonna. Okay, so I'm probably going to repeat what you said and then maybe what I said, but the Chinese restaurant scene, I thought, like, when I read the book of that piece, they literally went into my brain and recreated what I remember reading about that scene, about the things coming out of the fortune cookies and the craziness that was going on around them, like them being reintroduced into the it world and with by an epic way. Like, it was just a really strong scene that it was in my brain already. It's very hard to recreate what somebody reads, and they did a really good job with it. So I have to say that one, and then Jessica Chastain, Beverly's scene in the apartment with the old lady. That freaked me the fuck out. That was fucking crazy. And then and I have a third. I like the ending when Eddie dies. Like, he was so scared through the whole movie. Like, he literally lived in fear his entire life. Even when, he was supposed to be brave and everybody was being brave, he was still like pussing out and was apologizing for it. He was so scared. And then he has that weapon and he, hurts the monster to save Richie and he dies. And that just, I cried. It got me in the feels for sure.
Funny. Like, you never turn your back to the monster.
No, but bless his heart. He was so proud of himself, And somebody had to die.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, he really did, like, what is that thing called? It was like an expert javelin throw. It was a thing of beauty. That was the one colorful moment of that fight was, when he hits him in the mouth and the dead lights is kind of shining out or whatever. For me, I just wish we would have gotten a little bit longer sequence. It was when Mike gave Bill the root and he was kind of seeing what, he and Mike were kind of seeing, what was going on. I would have loved a little bit more extended sequence. Now, of course, Pennywise, and I think Pennywise in the books existed between the realm of like somewhere else and like mankind or something like that. I think, and then there was a thing about the turtle and all of that stuff. So we didn't get, we didn't get a lot of that stuff. Oh, Pennywise gave birth to our universe or something like it was something like that in the book. But I loved, or it gave the, birth to our galaxy or universe or something like that. But I felt like I would have loved to have gotten an extended version of that. And then I probably, and I definitely have to say, it was the scene, with Beverly in the house, but it wasn't like all of the acting and all of that. I give the credit, the older woman totally killed it.
Totally.
But then the CGI for when, she ran out.
Oh my God.
Because, if you hear it on the good speakers, like it literally feels like you're in that room because a lot of it is the sound of the monsters stomping out. And I thought that was cool and also a genius thing to wear when you're watching the trailer. You're like, I think I know where this is going. You're like, no, the fuck you don't, because that is pretty... that was a pretty cool little scene, especially to jump off so early in the film. So probably those two were my favorites. But all of the effects, I give them mad props. And like I said, maybe a little bit more. It just seems like it could just be chiseled down a little bit. And you almost just feel like they went a little harder to kind of give people eye candy instead of focusing on the stuff that made you like it to begin, like it series to begin with, which was, character development and really a heightened version of what the PTSD did to the loser. So,
agreed.
Hey, Creepers. Sorry I wasn't able to be with y'all for our 2-year anniversary show, our review of It Chapter 2. So this is Moni, by the way. I just wanted to take a minute to come in and give my review because I'm sure you all were waited with bated breath for what Moni was going to say about it. I give the movie a 7 out of 10, and that would be because I think that it was, for being almost 3 hours, there was also a lot of times where I felt that the film sort of just scraped through some things or kind of breezed past. So there were a lot of elements that didn't make a ton of sense. There were a lot of things that we had seen in the first film, like the way Pennywise looks when he's about to attack and hurt someone, that I think we had already kind of seen in the first film and therefore were a little bit desensitized to in the second. And so due to that, even the horror didn't work as well for me. I think that the hate crime, while it was very relevant to 2019, and while that was also in the book, I think that starting with a 10 or 15 minute hate crime, for me personally, just kind of set a tone of more realism. I know that sounds weird, but then I usually like in my escapist horror films, I'm here to see, a clown come fuck some stuff up. I'm not really here to see people get beaten to death and thrown over into a river because they're gay, at least not right at the beginning of the film. So that just set a weird frame of mind and a weird tone for me, having kind of experienced a lot of the hate that people have, apparently, even in 2019 towards one another. So at any rate, that would be why I give it a 7. I would recommend seeing it, but I would also say, especially when you're looking at how amazing the first film was, I think, that this one, honestly, you could wait to rent. I had to see it because I really wanted to see the follow-up. I think this franchise could have actually benefited from being a trilogy. I think that adding another film, while I'm usually not an advocate for that, I think that they could have done 2-hour movies each time and really taken the time to explain some of the things that felt sort of disjointed. So overall, 7 out of 10. See it, but don't rush to the theater.
Thank you, Moni.
Yay, thank you.
So we'll find out what's going to be going on with Moni, Kristi.
Mm-hmm.
How can they find you on social media?
You can find me on Instagram at creepin@Kristi, and I am on Twitter at creepin_it. And then we're all on Facebook under the Creepin' It Real Show, posting at different times. This is our season to reason. So, literally, the reason why I exist is the fall Halloween. So we're going to be really ramping up our shit. So definitely pay attention to what we're posting in the next couple of months.
All right, too easy. And you can follow me on Twitter at militant_marker. And you can find Moni on Instagram and on Twitter at Moni Bear, Barre.
Yes. And
So,
Rebel Moni on
yeah,
Twitter. She has two names.
well, fancy with these handles, but thanks everybody who's been listening to Creeping in Real. It's been a pleasure, and we hope that October is very kind to us with content, and I know that it will be, because we definitely have to ramp it up, because that is the season for your horror stories and Halloween and all of that, and that's going to be cool. But in order to get there, we've got to get through September, and we're going to try our best to keep bringing some great content. And of course, I think whenever that movie Black Christmas, which Kristi thinks is going to suck, hopefully that'll come out and be at least all right, and we can see what's going on with that. But at least with that, they're not taking themselves seriously, though.
Don't even get me started. The Real Black Christmas is a great movie. And then they name this white sorority bullshit Black Christmas. I'm like,
didn't that
really?
one come out in the 70s? When was it? Or was it?
Well, there's a 70s one, and then there's a recreation recently, but it's good. Like, it's a real good movie. It's Black Christmas, like good Black Christmas. This is Black Christmas, like stupid sorority bullshit Black Christmas. I mean, it'll be okay, but I'm not.
I don't think I've seen that.
Oh, watch it. Watch it. It's good.
Watch it. But but there was one before that, though, right?
Yeah, it's the same.
Okay.
It's basically based on the same stories. It's an anthology, and it's good. It's a good one. Like, it freaked me the fuck out. Like, it was a good story. And so I'm like, Black Christmas, they're remaking this shit again. They just remade it. And then I see it's not being remade at all. It's some other bullshit. So that's why I looked at you and I was like, oh, this is going to be stupid, because it's not the same movie.
But that's kind of on the movie front. I will say that there's a Netflix series. It's called like Slasher. And I was saying that I actually watched all 8 episodes of it. I mean, the writing isn't the best, and the acting in a lot of instances isn't the best, but it's got some good ass kills on it. So if you have Netflix and you're into slasher movies, I would recommend checking out Slasher, even if you have to watch it on mute. I would say just because some of those kills in it is really epic, and I felt like the series had a bunch of potential, but the way that it ends is a way that's predictable, and we've seen this type of ending before in like horror movies and specifically slasher movies. But there's some, they don't really pull any punches with that. So I will reluctantly recommend people to see it if you want to see some cool effects, because I think with their budget they did what they could, and for the most part it'll at least make it'll give you like the people's eyebrow, like from The Rock, when you see some of these kills. So if anything, kind of check that out. But it's 8 episodes and they run close to an hour a pop. I don't know, maybe like 50 minutes or something like that. But I would say just check that out if you're just, hey, if you're just out of options. If anything, laugh at it, or you'll watch it and fall asleep, and the television will be watching you. And with all and with all that being said, until next time, creep it real.